We continue now at the top of Daf Samech and Beis in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 68b. The Mishnah is in the middle of discussing cases where Malika is done, and not only is it a disqualified Malika, but it is not even a Malika to purify the bird from being considered a Nevela. It still would be considered a Nivlas Of Tahar, which is Metame Bebeis Habliya. It creates Tumah in the throat. As the Mishnah now continues, Torin Shelo Higia Zmanon, let's say doves which are not old enough to be bird karbanos, or Uvnei Yon, or let's say pigeons, She'avar Zmanon, which are too old, or the Mishnah says Sheyav Shagapa, if the wings withered, or Shenismis Eina, if its eye was blinded, Vishanikta Ragla, if its foot was cut. In all of these cases, the bird is not fit to be a carbon, so again, the Malika is not going to do anything. It's going to be considered a Nevela, and Mitame, Bebeis Habliya, we're going to say that there is Tumas Beis Habliya in such a situation. It is essentially considered a Nivlas Of Tahar. And Rashi explains, Torin Shelo Higia Zmanon, again, Torin, which are not old enough, Uvnei Yona She'avar Zmanon, or Bnei Yona, which are too old, Einon Ru'uyin LeKarban, those are not fit to be a carbon, V'hava Lahu, Ki Malika Schulin, it would be like doing Malika on a non-sacred bird, the Tanya B'Hakol Shochten, as we learned in the Bryce on Hakol Shochten, Torin, when it says Torin, it means Gedolim, V'lo Katanim, it means they have to be adults, not small, Bnei Yona, when it says Bnei Yona, so that's Katanim, V'lo Gedolim, that's small and not large. And Rashi continues, Shenismis Eina, if its eye is blinded, the Havale Mechusar Aver, that's considered missing a limb, so that's not kosher to be a carbon. And the Mishnah continues and says, Zeh HaKlal, this is the general rule. Kol Shepsulo BaKodesh, if the disqualification takes place in the Kodesh, in the holy, so then Eino Metame Bebeis Habliya, so then we are going to say that it's not considered a Nevela, and it's not going to be Tameh Bebeis Habliya. But Lo HaYapsulo BaKodesh, but if the disqualification was not in the Kodesh, so then Metame Bebeis Habliya, then it's even going to be considered a Nevela. It's not going to be considered to have been a proper Malika, even, and again, we're going to say that there is Tumas Beis Habliya. Rashi explains, Shepsula Bakodesh means, Sheba Li Azar, it came to the Azara Behechshera while it was kosher, V'nifsula, and then it became disqualified. If when it came to the Azara it was kosher, and then it became disqualified, so then we're going to say again, Eino Mitame Bebeis Habliya, in such a situation, it is not considered Nivlas Of Tahar, but if it already was puzzle before the Kodesh, so then it's Mitame Bebeis Habliya, it's considered to be a Nivlas Of Tahar. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Smol V'layl, if the Malika is done with the left hand, or if it is done at night, so Ein Mitamin Bebeis Habliya, then we say that bird is not Mitame Bebeis Habliya, it is not considered to be a Nevela in that situation. The Malika was effective in terms of making it not a Nevela. But Zar V'sakin, if the Malika is done by a non-Kohen, or if it is done with a knife, Mitamin Bebeis Habliya, so then it is Mitame Bebeis Habliya, then the Malika is considered like nothing, and it's considered to be like a Nevela. Rashi says, Smol V'layla, Molak B'smol O B'layla, again the Malika was with the left hand, or it was done at night. Zara non-Kohen, V'uadin La'onein, V'orel, V'chol Apsulin, the same would be true by an Onein or an Orel, or anyone that's disqualified, any person that's disqualified would be in the same category as a Zar with regards to this halacha. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishna Smol, what's the difference with the left hand? The Islay Hechsheira B'Yom HaKippur, and we find that sometimes the left hand is used in some of the avodas of Yom Kippur, therefore it has a certain amount of hechsher, it has a certain amount of qualification. Rashi says, B'Yom HaKippurim natalas hamachta b'yamino, v'es hakaf b'smolo, for example, the machta is taken with the right hand, the kaf is taken with the left hand, you have the left hand being used in some capacity. V'layla, and also when it comes to night, islay hechsheira be'ivarim u'pedarim, there are things you burn on the mizbeach overnight, like the limbs, so also night we find that there is an element of kashrus to the night. But if that's the logic, zar nami, when it comes to a non-kohen also, islay hechsheira b'shchita, there is something that the zar is able to do as well. He's able to slaughter the animal. That does not need to be done when it comes to an animal carbon. It does not need to be done by a kohen. A zar is also able to do the slaughtering. And the Gemara says to that, shchita lav avoda, he's slaughtering is not considered to be an avoda, so therefore that does not play into any factor in terms of, again, whether in this particular situation it's not going to be metame bebeis habliya. The Gemara continues and says, velo, is it really not considered an avoda? V'amar Rabbi Zera, but Rabbi Zera says, shchitas para bizar psula, when it comes to the para aduma, it's not able to be slaughtered by a non-kohen. Umachvi rav Allah elo Elazar v'chuka, and Rav pointed out that the reason for that is because it says Elazar, and it says chuka. Elazar means to say that it has to be a Kohen, and chuka means that it is required. And the Gemara says, Shani Para, you can't bring a proof from the Para Aduma, because the Para Aduma is different. The Kadshe Bedek Habayis, that's not a carbon that's considered to be in the category of Kadshe Bedek Habayis. Kadshe Bedek Habayis is something that's sanctified for the repair of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Para Aduma is considered to be in the same category. Rashi explains the Kadshe Bedek Habayis Val Karchach Ein Avodos Shalah Chashuvos Avoda. Any avodos that are done, the procedures by the Para Aduma, are not considered to be an avoda, and therefore you cannot bring a proof from over there. But the Gemara says, "V'lo kol tekenu," but it should be a kol shekain. It should be a kal v'chomer. Certainly, if it's true by Para Aduma, meaning Kadshe Bedek Habayis bo kahuna. If Kadshe Bedek Habayis, if there's a requirement of kahuna over there, if anything, Bedek Habayis should have less requirements. If there's a requirement of kahuna over there, so Kadshe Mizbeach miboy. So when it comes to Kadshe Mizbeach, things that go on the Mizbeach, certainly there should be such a requirement. And so therefore, again, you see that the shechita should be considered an avoda. We should be able to prove something from the fact that a zar, a non-kohen, is able to do shechita. And the Gemara continues and says, Amar Rav Shisha b'reid Ravidi, Rav Shisha, the son of Ravidi, says, Midi dahave amaros negoyim. It's similar to what we find by maros negoyim. Maros negoyim is when a person has saras and he has to show it to the kohen. Clearly, the lava avoda, that's not an avoda, uboy kahuna, and yet there is a kahuna requirement. Just the fact that there's a kahuna requirement doesn't necessarily mean anything, and so therefore these are kahuna requirements by non-avodos. They have nothing to do with what we are discussing, and so therefore shchita, which is kosher with a non-kohen, one can simply say that that is because it is not an avoda, and again, it would not be in consideration at all in terms of deciding that if a zor were to do it, it should have some effect. And we're going to say again that if a zor is going to do the malika, it's going to have no effect whatsoever. It's not even going to purify it in terms of tumas beis habliya. But the Gemara continues and says, V'neilef mi bama, but why can't we learn from bama? Rashi explains, V'neilef mi bama, shahazor kosher ba, limlok ofos lechatchila. A non-Kohen can actually do malika by birds, by any time they would bring the bird on a bama, which is an altar outside of the mikdash, the ein kiyun bebama, because there is no requirement of Kohen there by the bama, kiditanan beferek basra, that's going to be a mission in the last perek. V'kevan de'eshkechon lehachsheira lechatchila, if we find that a non-Kohen in some scenario can do malika lechatchila, be'alma yitar kan midei nevela. So again, we should at least say that over here the malika should purify it from tomas nevela. And so therefore, again, why don't we learn from bama? And the Gemara says, mi bama lo yala, from bama we don't learn. Rashi says, mi bama lo yalfinan b'mikdash, de bama kecholhi legave mikdash. A bama is considered mundane when compared to the Beis HaMikdash. You can't learn from bama to something in the Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara says, v'lo, do we really not learn from bama? V'atanya, but we learned in a brayso, minayin liyotze. From where do we know that, let's say, it leaves the area where it's supposed to be, something that was supposed to go on the Mizbeach, and then it leaves the area of the Azara, let's say, Shem Allah lo yered, that if it then goes up onto the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down from the Mizbeach. How do we know that something that's in the category of Yotze, once it goes on the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down? Shaharei Yotze, kosher by Bama, because Yotze is kosher by Bama. The whole idea of Bama is that it's outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So since Yotze is kosher over there, so in general, when you have something that is Yotze, we still say that if it goes up on the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down from the Mizbeach. In any case, you see, we're learning something from Bama to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara says, no, the Tana of this Braisa, Azos Torah Ha'ola Samachle, is actually not learning from Bama, is actually learning from the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, Zos Torah Ha'ola, we learn from there, Ha'ola, that which goes up on the Mizbeach, should not come down. And the Gemara continues with a second opinion against what Rav said earlier for Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says, we make a distinction. Zar ein metamei beis habliya. When it comes to a zar, actually that does do something. There's no tomas beis habliya if the zar does malika, but sakin metamei beis habliya. But when it comes to a knife, let's say the malika is done with a knife, so then that would be considered like nothing, and there still would be tomas beis habliya. Rashi explains, Rabbi Yochanan Amar molak zar eino metamei beis habliya dialfinan mi bama. According to Rabbi Yochanan, we do learn from Bama, and therefore there's no Tomas Beis Habliya when the Zar does the Malika. But Sakin Metame, but if it's done with a knife, it is Metame. The Lo Malika Velo Shchita, that's not considered in the category of Malika or Shchita. Lo Eshkechan Hechsher, we don't find anything similar, any type of case where that would be kosher, and therefore with a Sakin, in that situation, it is going to be Metame Beis Habliya. It's not going to be considered anything in terms of purifying it from having that Tomas Nevela. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Kol Hapsulin Shemalku Malikasam Psul, it says, all disqualified who do the malika, we're going to say that it is disqualified, but again, there's going to be no tumas beis habliya. That was the point of that first line of the Mishnah. So b'shlomo Rabbi Yochanan, now I understand according to Rabbi Yochanan, kol, the word kol is usually an inclusion, so le'suye zar, that comes to include a non-Kohen, that there would be no tumas beis habliya. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Ela l'Rav, but according to Rav, kol le'suye mai, Rav says in both of these cases, we say that there is tumas beis habliya, so what is the kol coming to include? Lav le'suye smol v'layla, so the Gemara says, well, maybe it's to include, let's say it's done with a left-hander, it's done at night, but that one makes sense. Smol v'layla behedya katani. Smol and Laila are actually listed in the Mishnah. Those cases are brought in the Mishnah, where we say that there's no tumas beis habliya, and the Gemara says to that, Tani v'hadr mefarish, according to Rav, it's being taught and it's included in the kol, but then the Mishnah actually goes and actually explains exactly what it is that we're including. So Rav will say again, what we're including is smol v'layla. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, the following proof, the Mishnah said, Zehaklal, this is the rule, Kol sheyapsulo ba'kodesh, if the disqualification happens in the Kodesh, so eino mitame begadim beis habliya, so then there's no tumas beis habliya. So b'shlomo Rabbi Yochanan, I understand, according to Rabbi Yochanan, again, Kol le'suye zar, Kol will include zar, that case of zar is eino mitame beis habliya. Ela l'Rav, but according to Rav le'suye mai, what is that coming to include? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Tes Amud Aleph.